Welcome, everyone, to our discussion on the origins of the papacy and whether the line of popes, starting with St. Peter, is a solid historical chain or more of a constructed tradition.
I'm really excited about digging into that. There's a lot to unpack here, from the early church's scattered writings to the famous stories we all know.
Right, when we look back to the early days, from say around 30 CE to 235 CE, things get very murky. For instance, the tradition has it that Peter the Apostle arrived in Rome and served as the first bishop until his martyrdom under Nero. But early sources give us little evidence of him playing a formal bishop role in Rome.
It really makes you wonder, doesn't it? I mean, the New Testament itself, composed between about 50 and 100 CE, doesn't state Peter was actually Rome's bishop.
Absolutely. And what's fascinating is that the idea of Peter as the first bishop of Rome only shows up in later writings. Notably, we see Irenaeus of Lyons, writing around 180 CE, listing Peter and Paul as the co-founders of the church in Rome. And then Eusebius later compiles that full list.
So it's like the narrative was gradually built up to support Rome's claim to authority. But, you know, scholars like Bart Ehrman and James D. Tabor challenge that view quite strongly, right?
Right, they do. Ehrman argues there's no solid historical evidence that Peter actually acted as a bishop in Rome, and Tabor suggests that the idea of a singular ruling bishop didn't emerge until the 2nd century. It's almost as if Rome retroactively stitched together a narrative.
That's intriguing. It almost sounds like they needed a founding myth to justify Roman primacy.
Exactly. And then we move on to the successors, Linus, Anacletus, and Clement. Now, Linus and Anacletus are listed as popes, but historical records on them are extremely scarce. It's like there's just a shadowy outline.
And Clement, who came a bit later, around 88 to 99 CE, is our first, more concrete figure. His letter to the Corinthians is one of the earliest Christian writings outside the New Testament, right?
Yes, that's right. But what's really interesting is that even Clement never really refers to himself as a pope. Instead, his letter shows him urging unity among church members without claiming any overarching authority over other bishops in the way we think about the papacy today.
So it really appears that in those early days, Rome wasn't yet the centralized authority we later imagine it to be.
Exactly. Moving into the 2nd century, we see names like Evaristus, Alexander I, Sixtus IV, Telesphorus, Hyginus, and others appear in the traditional list. But historians like Jeffrey Lampe and Raymond Brown suggest that instead of a single bishop, Rome was more likely run by a group of presbyters.
Totally see that. So the idea of having one singular bishop, a singular pope, seems like it might have been a later invention.
Precisely. The later legendary stories, like the martyrdoms attached to many of these early popes, are often based on sources that emerged centuries later. They provide a sort of mythic narrative rather than verifiable historical fact.
Now that's a key point. The blurred line between myth and historical fact. I mean, how often do we see that in early religious narratives?
Right, and it's a common theme. Take, for instance, Calixtus the Fern in the early 3rd century. His reign becomes really interesting because a theologian named Hippolytus broke away from him and set himself up as the first antipope. That schism hints at a time when there was real conflict and contestation over authority.
Exactly. That's such a dramatic twist, the emergence of an anti-pope. It really suggests that even back then, there were deep divisions over who was legitimately holding power in the church.
Absolutely. And then we have the cases of martyrdom. Many of the early popes are said to have died as martyrs, but when you examine the historical evidence, it's pretty weak. Candida Moss, for example, argues that most martyr narratives were penned long after the actual events with little documentary support.
That makes you wonder how much of it was later embellishment to further sanctify the papal office.
Right, exactly. Pontian, who reigned around 230 to 235 CE, is a prime example. He was exiled and resigned, and there's ambiguity about whether he truly died a martyr. It really shows that the line between fact and hagiographic fiction is pretty blurred.
Yeah, that's a fair point. Then there's the broader evolution of Rome itself. By 235 CE, the Bishop of Rome was only one voice among many within the Church, with significant power still lying elsewhere, like in Alexandria and Antioch.
Exactly. Rome's eventual rise as the central authority was less a gradual, inevitable thing and more a product of myth-making, political maneuvering, and carefully curated martyr stories.
So it seems like religious narratives about early leadership can sometimes be as much about politics as they are about faith.
Absolutely. And here's where I do kind of want to push back a bit. While it's easy to dismiss these narratives as mere fiction, one could argue they served a very real purpose in shaping early Christian identity and unity.
I understand your point. That's a good challenge. Even if the stories aren't strictly historical, they made a massive impact on how the church perceived itself and its authority over time.
Precisely. The evolution from a loosely structured group of believers to a powerful central authority didn't just happen by accident. It was bolstered by creating and, reinforcing a lineage that linked back to figures like Peter, whether or not all the details hold up under modern historical scrutiny.
And it's fascinating how these narratives transform as they pass through time. They influence not only religious thought, but also political structures in later centuries.
Right? It's like an evolving story. It's like a tapestry woven with threads of doctrine, legend, and real historical events.
Now that analogy really captures it well. The layers of myth and fact are intricately interlaced.
Exactly. And as we look ahead, later developments like the legalization of Christianity and the increasing political power of bishops only build on this foundation. It's almost a domino effect where myth paves the way for institutional power.
Yep, that domino effect is a neat way to put it. Given all of this, how do we reconcile the religious tradition with modern historical analysis? It seems like a tightrope walk between preserving faith narratives and digging into the actual historical evidence.
That's the million-dollar question, isn't it? On one side, you have tradition and religious belief, which hold immense value for millions of people. On the other, historians want to get at the verifiable past. Scholars like Oscar Cullmann, for instance, acknowledge that Peter likely died in Rome, but argue against him holding an episcopal office.
And that debate really speaks to a broader issue, how institutions shape their origins to serve contemporary purposes, right?
Exactly. The narrative of an unbroken papal succession from Peter onward serves not just as a historical account, but also as a legitimizing tool. It's a constructed continuity that cements Rome's retrospective authority.
Absolutely. It's a reminder that history, especially early history, is often not just a straightforward account, but a blend of memory, myth, and political necessity.
Right. And while the historical record might be patchy, the impact of these narratives is undeniable. They remind us that understanding history requires navigating these layers of embellishment and fact.
It really gives you a fresh perspective on how religious traditions are formed and later used. A kind of cultural evolution of authority itself.
Absolutely. And as conversations continue and new research emerges, we get closer to peeling back the layers of legend and myth to understand the roots of these traditions. It's a journey through time where neither faith nor historical scrutiny can be ignored.
Yep, indeed.